Hi guys, now we have the you ought to know section, which is going to be question 19. It's going to be page 147. So you ought to know, it's going to be page 147. The problems in this section are very important. We just don't have enough time to get to these two. It's two problems you ought to know, 19 and 20. We just don't have enough space for them in the 3 hours of class time. So here's the you ought to know. Let's try both of these problems, okay? So let's talk about rationalizing denominators, page 147. You can never have anything other than an integer in the denominator. If you have a radical in the denominator, then you should multiply it by the same, by itself, in order to remove the radical, right? In this case, a square root. So let's see what that would be if we're talking about getting rid of the square root. So for example, let's say we had, just as an example, let's say we had 3 over the square root of 2. So that's what I mean about multiplying it by itself to get rid of the square root. So you can see on page 147 that says 3 over the square root of 2. So you then multiply that denominator by itself. I call it completing the square. I'm sure that's not the technical term for it. But you take the square root and you square that. And therefore, you're going to get rid of the root, right? So we know that this denominator is going to be the square root of 2 squared, which is just equal to 2. So we know the denominator is just going to be 2. What about that numerator? Well, you've also got to multiply that numerator by root 2. So now what you've got is 3 root 2, and that's how it's going to stay. So this is going to turn out to be 3 root 2 over 2. That's what 3 divided by the square root of 2 is going to be. It's going to be 3 square root of 2 over 2. Okay? So you want to get rid of that denominator. You want to at least make it into an integer. In this case, we didn't get rid of it, but we did turn it into an integer. Now, for this problem, if you look, you see that we are absolutely going to get rid of that denominator because none of the answer choices have a denominator. So you got to think to yourself on number 19, like, how am I going to make that denominator disappear? So take a few seconds to look at that. If you need a lot longer, pause it. I'm only going to give you like 15 seconds on the video, so pause it if you need more time. Try to see if you can get rid of that denominator. Okay? Think about it. Okay, so this isn't as simple as just multiplying by what's in the denominator. Because if we did multiply this by 2 times the negative square root of 2, right? 2 times, if we did multiply this by 2 minus the square root of 2, if we did this, that's not going to go away, is it? I mean, you're going to have 4, right? You're going to end up with 4 square roots of 2 in there. That's not going to quite work out for us. So that's really not the way to go. You're not going to be able to multiply it just by itself in this case. You're also not going to be able to multiply by A, B, or E. Because multiplying that denominator by an integer is not going to rationalize that. You're not going to get rid of that square root if you multiply this thing by 2. You're just going to have 2 square roots of 2. So it's down to either C or D because they each have square root of 2, and that's what we need. You need to multiply that root 2 by another root 2. Well, I don't think it's going to be C, and here's why. I don't think it's going to be C because this isn't really going to balance out. Let's try D, and let's see if it does what I think it's going to do. Let's multiply this by 2 plus the square root of 2. Now we're going to what? We're going to FOIL this, right? So if we FOIL this, if we go first, 2 times 2 is 4. We got 4. If we go last, we're going to get negative 2 times the negative square root of 2 times the positive square root of 2, right? So that's going to be minus 2. When you take square root of 2 and you square it, you get 2. We have a positive and a negative, so that's going to be a minus. And then what about in the middle? Well, in the middle, guys, this is actually just going to disappear. In the middle, you're going to go minus, right? So outside first, you're going to go plus 2 root 2. And then you're going to go inside minus 2 root 2. Those cancel out. Plus 2 root 2 minus 2 root 2. That cancels out. That just goes to 0, right? And then you have 4 minus 2, and you're just going to end up with 2. So your denominator just becomes 2. Now, what's your numerator going to be when your denominator is 2? Well, with the numerator, we also have to multiply by the same thing, which is 2 plus the square root of 2. Let's just write this over here before we get too hasty with anything. Let's just write this over. So this would be 2 times the quantity 2 plus root 2, right? The 2's cancel out. Look what you've got left. 2 plus the square root of 2. So it is answer choice D. Now, why did I use the answer choice to multiply? Because when your numerator is something like 1 or 2, there's a great chance, especially if the numerator is 1, because you're multiplying by the same thing top and bottom, there's a great chance that whatever you're left with is what you multiplied by. So let the answer choices be a great clue to guide you there. And we could see that once we did that, what we've actually done is we've taken that denominator, basically gone down, and we're just left with 4 minus 2. Okay? Left with just 4 minus 2. So actually what we ended up there was a difference of squares. We did 2 minus root 2 and then 2 plus root 2, which is like x plus y, x minus y. But in your book on page 149, they talk about if you don't see it, estimate. Okay? So let me tell you what it says in the book here. It says in the book, in that box on page 149, that the square root of 2 is about 1.4, right? About 1.4. So this would be 2 over 2 minus about 1.4. So that's going to be 2 divided by just about 0.6. 2 divided by 0.6. And so what it says is the answer choice should be pretty close to 4. Because if you had 2 divided by 1/2, that would equal 4. When you divide something by a fraction, it gets bigger. 2 divided by 1/2 is basically 2 multiplied by 2. So we need a number slightly less than 4. So we need a number just less than 4, right around 4. Okay? Well, not 1 and not 2, and it's less than 4. And besides that, really, this is going to come out to just be the number 4. That's not going to work, right? So then we have 1 plus root 2, 2 plus root 2. Well, this is about this is about 1 plus 1.4. That's about 2.4. This is 2 plus 1.4. That is about 3.4. So it's got to be less than 4 because we're dividing by something bigger than 0.5. So E is out. The only possibility is D. So if you don't see it, maybe you can estimate. All right, and let's do our last. You ought to know. This is inequalities with absolute value. So now we're going to be on page 153. So here we have the inequality. The square root of x is less than 5. Okay. What that means is that x is either greater than -5, less than +5. So how do we know that? Because if you put -4 in here, right? -4 absolute value, that becomes 4. 4 is less than 5. That works. If you put +4 in here, that becomes the same thing. But if you put -6 in here, -6 would become 6. And 6 would be greater than 5, so that doesn't work. So you can see we've drawn it out right here. The empty circle means that 5's not included. So -5's not included and +5's not included. But the rest of these numbers, everywhere from -5 to +5, not inclusive, works there. Now, one way that you do this is you simply take x is less than 5, right? So you just drop the inequality sign, the absolute value signs. Then the second thing you do is you drop the absolute value signs, but you multiply the other side by -1. And so what that means is you're going to flip the sign and then make that negative. So then you're going to go like this. X is greater than negative 5. And you can see that right there. And the same thing is going to work on all of our inequalities. Just drop the inequality sign first. Then drop the inequality sign, drop the absolute values. I meant to say absolute value. We drop the absolute value first. We're good. Then we drop the absolute value. We flip the inequality sign, and we make everything on the other side negative. Okay? So we can do the same thing down here. So the first thing we do is we drop the inequality, and we just go x minus 3 is greater than 5. So x is greater than 8. So that's one thing. And you could see that if you have 9 in here, 9 minus 3 is 6. That's greater than 5. But if you have 7 in here, 7 minus 3 is 4. That doesn't work. So x being greater than 8, that works. The second thing you do is you drop the absolute value. So you have x minus 3. You reverse the inequality, and you multiply everything on the other side by a negative. So now we say x minus 3 is less than negative 5. So go ahead and add 3. We say x is less than negative 2. X is less than negative 2. That's our other answer. And you can check it out. If you put negative 3 in here, negative 3 minus 3, negative 6. Absolute value is 6. 6 is greater than 5. But if you put negative 1 in here, negative 1 and negative 3, that's negative 4. Absolute value is 4. 4 is not greater than 5. So the two answers here are going to be that x is greater than 8, but x is less than negative 2. So that's your two possibilities. So on a number line, that's going to point in other directions, right? So x is going to be greater than 8 in this case, and x is going to be less than negative 2, which would be like this. Okay? All right, so let's try our last problem, which is number 20 on page 153. So again, I'll just give you a moment as I let you look at it, but pause it if you need to. All right, let's do exactly the same thing we did. Drop the absolute value and just keep it the way it is to get our first number. So 2x plus 4 greater than x plus 5. So just keep it this way. Go ahead and subtract an x from both sides. Go ahead and subtract 4 from both sides. So you're going to get x is greater than 1. Okay? So that's going to be one of these. You're going to go 2x minus x is x. 5 minus 4 is 1. So x is greater than 1. That's one possibility. Let's put our a, b, c, d up here like we should. So if the one possibility is for x to be greater than 1, which means that's obviously greater than 1, put a check mark next to A, cross off B and C. The answer is either A or D. Now the next thing for us to do is to drop the absolute value, reverse the inequality, and change the signs of everything over here. You're just multiplying that side by negative 1. That's all you're doing. So now it's going to be 2x plus 4 less than, make this negative x, make this negative 5. Okay? So now that means you're adding x to this side. So that's going to give you 3x. And that means that you're subtracting 4 from both sides. So that's going to give you negative 9. So 3x is less than negative 9. That's what we get. So that means if we divide both sides by 3, x is less than negative 3. So x is greater than 1 or x is less than negative 3. Clearly, 1 is bigger than a negative number. And if x is less than negative 3, right? So that would make b larger. Put a check mark next to b, circle D. So inequalities with absolute value, that's pretty tough, right? That's not easy. So, look back at this, make sure you understand it, look at the slides or whatever. So make sure this works out for you, and be sure to practice these, okay? That's what you ought to know, and that slide means we're done. Thanks.